Many people are willing to pray and worship God when they think it will improve their life or get them out of trouble. But how many are willing to worship God or pray when it will directly cause them hardship or put them in harm's way? The account of Daniel being delivered from the lion's den is well known. At least some of the details are well known. Lesser known is the reason Daniel was in the lion's den in the first place. And wait a minute, why did those lions look so friendly? Didn't those same lions kill a bunch of men, women, and children who were thrown in the den after Daniel was released? That's better. So why did Daniel end up in the lion's den in the first place? And why should this account be so important for believers to understand today? Before we take another look at some of the lesser-known details, it's important for us to know that Daniel is singled out by God himself as a gleaming example of a righteous man. Twice in Ezekiel chapter 14, God mentions Daniel, along with Noah and Job, as being particularly righteous in his sight. And while Daniel's righteousness is praised by God, it was this same righteous conduct that got Daniel thrown into the lion's den in the first place. Daniel was an exile in the land of Babylon. Despite being in exile, God was with Daniel, and he found favor with the foreign rulers. In Daniel 6, we read about how Daniel was becoming distinguished amongst his contemporaries, so much so that King Darius planned to appoint Daniel over the entire kingdom. This greatly displeased the other satraps and commissioners, so they began to conspire against Daniel, looking for some grounds to accuse Daniel before the king. Yet because of Daniel's faithfulness, no grounds existed to accuse him. There simply was no negligence or corruption to be found in him. Then these men said, "We will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God." These commissioners and satraps convinced the king to issue a decree outlawing prayers or petitions to be made to any god or any man other than the king for a period of 30 days. Anyone who violated this law was to be cast into the lion's den. King Darius agreed and signed it into law. In Daniel 6:10 we read, "Now when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber he had windows open toward Jerusalem, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously." Righteous Daniel knew the law forbidding his practice. He also knew it was right for him to obey God rather than men. Daniel was faithful in all of his deeds, which included a willingness to continue worshiping the true and living God, no matter the threats against him. I'll say it again. Many are willing to worship God and to pray in order to improve their life or get them out of trouble. But how many are willing to worship God or pray when it will directly cause them hardship or put them in harm's way? The men who had conspired against Daniel came and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. Since Daniel was in violation of the king's decree, the penalty was that Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. In this particular case, Daniel was delivered. The men who conspired against Daniel ended up getting thrown into the same lion's den by the king, along with their children and wives, and they were not delivered. The real punch to this story isn't the deliverance of Daniel. Even King Darius believed Daniel's God was able to deliver him. No, the real takeaway is the resolve of Daniel to continue worshiping God no matter the threats against him. Earlier in the book of Daniel, we read about his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their deliverance from the fiery furnace is just as well known as Daniel's deliverance from the lion's den. However, a lesser-known detail is in their testimony before they were delivered from the flames. They testified before the king, saying, "Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. We know our God can deliver. But even if he does not, we will not serve your gods or worship anything else." In Hebrews chapter 11, we read many more examples of the triumphs of faith. Some were delivered from death. Many were not. Even so, they knew that God alone was worthy of their praise and devotion until the very end. So how about you? Are you willing to count the cost? To walk with the living God even when it is costly? Or are you more of a lukewarm, fair-weather follower of Christ, who is only willing to walk with Him when it makes your life more comfortable? Daniel showed us what it looks like to honor both God and human authority. He was willing to submit himself to whatever penalties were necessary and to pay whatever cost, entrusting himself to a faithful God whom he knew was able to deliver him if he so choose. The one thing Daniel was unwilling to do was to stop giving God the honor that was due His great name. Daniel was unwilling to stop worshiping God, even for a brief time, only 30 days, to save his own skin. Daniel's example should give modern followers of Christ courage to continue worshiping God in every season and circumstance. Like Daniel, we can entrust ourselves to a faithful God and honor Him no matter what. Our God is able to deliver us too, but even if He doesn't, we will not stop giving Him the honor, glory, and praise that is due to His great name.